recap college football, look ahead to the day of NFL games. So, Mike, let's go ahead and look back. College football playoff right now is pretty much a paradox. It's more clear than it was last week, but then it's even murkier than last week. We'll discuss the murk as we go on, but the clear is pretty easy. Clemson isn't getting in after losing at home to South Carolina. Georgia's in no matter what happens next week in Atlanta after they blasted Georgia Tech yesterday. And it's clear that TCU and Michigan get in with wins next week in their conference championship games.
Sure. LSU, they won't get in even with the win at Georgia, and they're a big dog, 16, 17-point underdog. But how ready will the Bulldogs be? I mean, they don't need to win. We saw that last year. A big key here is the main key is how far does Ohio State drop after getting trounced in the shoe?
Yeah, Michigan 45, Ohio State 23. As you said, the Wolverines went into the horseshoe. They trailed 2017 at the half, outscored the Buckeyes 28-3 in the last 30 minutes, completely controlled the line of scrimmage, had 252 yards total rushing, 242 of that in the second half, and that was without Blake Corum in the lineup. It's hard to fathom that Wolverines don't get by Purdue and hold on to that number 2 seed.
Yeah, I'm trying to find right now, the earliest number I see, Michigan's favored by 15 and a half. You say win and in, they may be in already, but they're a big favorite. I mean, look, we've tried to predict what the committee's going to do. We can only guess. But for the second time, or for the first time since 99, 2000, that's the Tom Brady years, Michigan has beaten Ohio State 2 times in a row. First time they've beaten Columbus in 22 years, and they did it with multiple big plays, 4 touchdowns of 69 yards or more. And hey, not piling on here, but the Buckeyes are the bully that steamrolls the week, and then when they get physically challenged, they back down. And look, that 22-point loss, it may have ended their playoff chances. Maybe not, but remember, 2017, they quit in the third quarter, got blown out to Iowa, and that kept them out.
Yeah, Ryan Day and the Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren, they were already lobbying for Ohio State to be in the playoffs less than 30 minutes after that game ended. Out in Fort Worth, TCU 62, Iowa State 14. No letdown or look ahead for the Frogs. That game was never in doubt. Very simple task for Sonny Dykes' squad next week. You beat Kansas State again in the Big 12 championship game, and they're in.
Yeah, we all keep waiting for TCU to lose. They refuse to fall in line and step aside for the so-called, college football elite. They hang 62 on Iowa State. I thought Iowa State was in a good spot to cover, not even close. Matt Campbell's team loses for the 8th time this year. You talk about beat Kansas State again. The Wildcats led them 28-10 at one point, and then they played with a second and third string quarterback. Coach, it's very difficult to beat a quality team twice in the same season. Alabama couldn't do it last year against Georgia. Auburn couldn't do it against Georgia in 17. LSU failed in 11. And there's many other instances as well. TCU is going to hear that. They'll hear how the first win over K-State was a fluke and they played against a second and third string quarterback. And Sonny Dykes is going to use that talk as fuel.
Yeah, I think Sonny Dykes, he loves that underdog role, and he's got the Frogs buying into it. Speaking of underdogs, Texas A&M 38, LSU 23. I will think anyone gave Texas A&M a realistic chance to win if you just look at it on the surface. But again, you kind of dig underneath, and you could see it coming. I mean, the Tigers, they play with no emotion, sloppy play on both sides of the ball and on special teams. And A&M, to their credit, they didn't play like a 4-17 that was just limping into the offseason. Jimbo and the Aggies, they needed that going into the offseason.
last week's show, we talked about it was a bad spot for LSU and how Jimbo could play spoiler. They did exactly that. LSU was looking ahead. And for future purposes, when predicting games, handicapping games, the teams that had a spot secured in a conference title game have not fared well. Yesterday, Georgia did not cover. Clemson lost. North Carolina lost. Coastal Carolina was absolutely drubbed by 40. UTSA didn't cover. Oregon was in a win and in situation. They lost. So basically, out of all those teams, USC and TCU were the only two teams to win and cover.
Speaking of USC, 38-27 over Notre Dame. Wasn't easy, but the Trojans looked good. Caleb Williams played outstanding. Heisman talk heating up, and rightfully so.
On Saturday, I bet 7 games personally. I lost 3 of them, and frankly, all 3 weren't even close, but they all pay or lose the same. But one of those that wasn't close was Notre Dame. Not surprised that they lost, but Coach, I was surprised how USC won this game. They held Notre Dame to 90-plus rush yards, and they ran for 206 against a pretty good defensive front for Notre Dame. Everyone, including myself, thought the script would be flipped in that scenario. USC was impressive, and they now get an opportunity to avenge that loss, their only loss against the Utes.
Yeah, they get to do it on a neutral field, too. They don't have to go down into Ross Eccles Stadium, and at night they get to play in the friendly confines in was it Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, where the Raiders play. And again,
great venue, by the way.
Pardon?
It's a great venue.
I have not been there. I know you have several times. But they get a chance at the Utes again. Then we've got Big 12 championship, TCU and Kansas State. That'll be at Jerry's World there in Arlington. And, of course, Georgia, LSU, and Atlanta. Michigan and Purdue and Indianapolis. And kind of as an afterthought, though, it is a conference championship game, one of the Power 5 conferences. Clemson and North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm going the over-under on attendance as being 7,500.
Well, yeah, not too much excitement involving that game. Now, we'll start with the Pac-12 that you mentioned. USC, they're only a small favorite rather, to avenge that loss to Utah. Let me take a look at my board here right now. That game played on a Friday night. SC is like a 1. Some places have it pick. So Utah getting a lot of respect there. And again, we talked about beating a quality team twice in the same year. Utah did it to Oregon last year, but this USC team, in my opinion, is better than that 2021 Ducks team. The SEC title game, it just simply doesn't mean much. And we don't say that too often because Georgia could lose. They still get in. Big Ten West Division, total mess. The best they could produce was a 4-loss Purdue team. And Michigan, they might not even have to win. And they're a 15 to 16-point favorite looking at the big board here. And these lines are going to move, of course, because they just came out early this morning. The ACC title game, it's basically meaningless. Tar Heels they might be up for it. They got a young quarterback, and Mac Brown's might be able to get them up. But Clemson has to be disappointed. In August, I bought a ticket on them to win the league, so I guess I'll play North Carolina +8 and hope that Clemson wins between 1 and 8 points.
On a show that I was on late last night, someone brought up the fact, and I did not check this out, you may know, that this is the first time that a conference championship game has been played, and both teams playing in that game lost the week prior to play.
Well, that certainly makes sense because usually you don't have that big of a lead going into the final game. Of course, Clemson, you're talking about Clemson?
Clemson and North Carolina, yeah, with both of them losing, yes.
Right. Well, Clemson was playing out of conference.
Yeah.
But still, that's not surprising at all. And, that over-under on attendance may be pretty accurate.
All right, right now, the way I see it, Mike, Georgia's the only lock to get in. However, there's scuttlebutt that Michigan, there's several people that have put Michigan above Georgia in the final rankings. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think whoever is the number one seed going in, whether it be Georgia or Michigan, I think they're in no matter what. TCU, USC, and Michigan win. They're in. Of course, you, like many others, think that Michigan's going to be in regardless.
I'm not certain, but I think the top two are probably in. If all goes to form, and that scenario happens, that's how it'll play out. TCU, USC, and Michigan win out. It's cut and dried, right? But remember, TCU and USC, they're only small favorites. I mean, USC is going to be anywhere from pick to 2, I'm guessing, because that's what it is now. TCU, I'm looking at the board. TCU at an offshore casino, they're favored by 1.5. So there's no guarantees there in those championship games.
No, there's not. And one thing is they're in the Pac-12, it's going to be a short week because they play on Friday night. USC was in a much more physical game than Utah was on Saturday, and that could play a little bit into the readiness of those two teams.
Yeah, and again, so Utah has to beat USC twice in the same season, but again, they did it this time last year.
Right.
But once again, I feel like USC is better. This version of USC is better than last year's Oregon team, but now it's on a neutral field, and it's in Vegas. A lot of things out here.
Yeah,
crazy things happen.
Yeah. Now we both agree that no matter what happens next week in Atlanta, LSU doesn't get in. We're not wrong about that. But do you see any scenario where, and again, let's say USC, TCU, and Michigan win? Do you see? There's no scenario for Ohio State, and just to appease the fan base, there's absolutely no scenario where Alabama gets in. If they do, I'm going to have to eat a lot of crow. I can tell you that much.
Well, that's okay. But I feel like Ohio State and Alabama need the same path, and there's actually a path where they could both get in. It's unlikely. No path for LSU. But if we just saw Ohio State get drubbed at home by 22. So if USC and TCU both lose as very small favorites, which wouldn't be, that out of the ordinary, does Alabama and Ohio State both get in? Because we just saw 4 of the top 9 teams lose yesterday. And we act surprised, but this happens every November.